Hello again, everyone. So we're trying to talk to Mél Hogan at the Environmental Media Lab, and we had a hiccup with our first try, but we're trying again. So we're going to be talking about what the Environmental Media Lab does, hopefully. They're here, so I'm going to... We'll see how it goes. I sent an invite. Let's see, I'm accepting theirs. Yay! I don't know what happened the first time.
Probably just me not being very good with Instagram. That's what
Ah,
happened.
I doubt that. You're the Environmental Media Lab person.
Yeah, well, yeah. Anyway, thank you for trying again.
No
Yeah.
worries. Welcome to NiCHE Conversations again.
Yeah,
I'm
thank you
Jessica
so much.
DeWitt.
Yeah.
I'm uh, I'm one of the editors here at the Network in Canadian History and Environment, and today I am joined by Mél Hogan. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Mél Hogan. I'm the director of the Environmental Media Lab. It started back in around 2019, 2020 at the University of Calgary, and now I've moved to Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. And so I have brought the lab with me, so to speak. I'm also in the film and media department here, focusing mainly these days on the environmental impacts of AI and things like that.
Yeah, which is super fascinating, and I really appreciate work on that. But so today I invited you just to chat about the Environmental Media Lab because I see it as kind of like a cousin organization in
Hmm.
the realm of Canadian environmental scholarly orgs and labs and groups working on this kind of stuff. And so first of all, I thought, deeper dive into what the Environmental Media Lab is, and also to kind of define environmental media for those who may not be familiar with the term.
Yeah, it was a good prompt that you sent me. You asked me to think about what is meant by environmental media, and if people like, I would kind of like before answering, I'd love to know what people think it is if they posted it in the comments, because I think you asking me, I will give you an answer, but I think depending on who you'd ask, you'd get a slightly different answer. And in a way, I was thinking about this morning that like all of the definitions are a little bit clunky, and I would say that environmental media studies grew out of environmental humanities, energy humanities, this kind of newer field of elemental media studies. And even like critical media studies and infrastructure studies. So I think it's sort of like borrows and plays with all of those other fields. And I guess we could think of it in terms of like a more critical, more feminist, more decolonial, anti-racist, queer, sort of decidedly critical, I guess, take on what it might mean to try to solve issues of climate change. And then I think there's a lot that would be on sort of representation of climate crisis and things like that. But I think the more interesting examples that move it more specifically into the environmental media realm would be like the work of Melody Ju or Yuriko Furuhata, who work more on that elemental aspect.
Yeah.
So to think of water or the atmosphere itself as a kind of medium, right? So that's super
Yeah.
interesting. Or like Zane Cooper, Ingrid Burrington, who really show us that our phones are made of minerals or things like that that play with like the natural materiality of these devices that make up media and technology. And then I also think of the work of like Josh Lapowski, who, will draw our attention to things like e-waste or like dominant discourses of what we think is, exacerbating climate crises, but shifts the attention to manufacturing, to show us sort of like the relational impacts of different kinds of things. If we take like something like a phone, all the mining versus the e-waste, and where sort of like the media tends to put its attention in relation to those issues. So all of that. So that's why it's sort of like a big, complicated like field, but I think it's also timely, urgent, and open to a lot of different types of methodologies, but all of them I would say quite, intentionally critical.
Cool. Yeah, it has so many possibilities, and I
Mm-hmm.
love learning more about it. And it's making me think of our final our next and final niche conversation of season 4 is going to be with Siobhan Angus, who just
Oh
released
yeah.
her book on the elemental history of photography. So that's going to tie in really nicely the last two
Yeah,
niche
and on
conversations.
Monday night, actually, I'll be at her book launch as participating with Chris Russell, just initiating conversation around
Yeah,
her work on photography and mineral extraction. So yeah,
cool.
that's another perfect example, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, May 28th, everyone, mark your calendars for that. We'll be talking about the book with Siobhan. Um, yeah, so we've got a bit about what the Environmental Media Lab is, and you've got a lot on the go. As you mentioned, you just moved to
hmm
Queens. Your grad student and residence program for this year, I think, wrapped up last night. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
right?
Exactly, exactly.
And
Yeah.
you've got the extractive AI project going. So I just wanted to, have you talk about what you're excited about in the lab right now.
Yeah, so I would say that the grad program for PhD students, they do a month-long sort of intensive residency.
Mhm.
And this year there were 4 students and 2 mentors, so sort of a new model. We
Mhm.
had Théo Lepage-Richer, who's a postdoc at the University of Toronto, and Susan Cal, who's at Calgary. And basically, we meet over Zoom, we discuss everyone's projects, and then yesterday they gave their presentations. The 4 PhD students gave their presentations, and the projects spanned from mining in and around Sudbury. We had a project based more in Chile with 5G and antenna technologies. We also had someone looking at fossil fuels as a kind of elemental media and like discourses of transition and
Mhm.
transformation. And we had someone who had a case study in China looking at this kind of secondhand extraction. The theme overall was extractive media, so everyone had a different
Mhm.
take on that. But like really, really impressive presentations. They're all uploaded to YouTube to the Environmental Media Lab
Yeah.
channel or whatever. I would encourage people to watch that. It was really pretty impressive, and again helps to sort of define and redefine what environmental media is. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I watched the ones from last year and they were great, and
hmm
I'm excited to delve into this year's as
Yeah.
well. And I think there's such a broad array of topics, which I think rolls into our final topic of discussion today. In that, I first became um, I first heard of the Environmental Media Lab when you wrote for NiCHE for our Environmental Histories of the Future series, I think
hmm
back in 2021.
hmm
And I learned of you and this lab, and I got really excited about it just because I, at NiCHE, have been, over the last decade, have just been really working on our interdisciplinary. And when I first started, I saw so many different groups of scholars and knowledge keepers, etc., talking about the same
hmm
things, but not talking to each other because of
hmm
disciplines and fields and
hmm
all of these, to me, made up things that academia does. Um, so I wondered if I see building a relationship between the Environmental Media Lab and NiCHE as as an exercise in interdisciplinarity. And I wondered if you could kind of talk about if you think interdisciplinary is important to the lab and your work and why.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I think I'm so post-disciplinarity that I
Mm-hmm.
don't even factor it in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just like a
Mm-hmm.
give, it's sort of like a starting point is beyond that. And I think more in terms of like, I know it's a word that's used a lot, but building community. And I think coming, out of the early days of the pandemic, this sense that like we had to shift, like whether it was the
Mm-hmm.
lab to being online, to be accessible, but also to counter a little bit of the isolation that was already present pre-pandemic days, but I think exacerbated by, you know, by a pandemic. And so I think for me, the idea, because I have a podcast as well, was like, how do I just be in conversation with people?
Mm-hmm.
I never look up what their discipline
Yeah.
is. I'm like, you're talking about this cool thing. Do you want to talk about it with me?
Yes.
And I realized, like, in addition to sort of like the intellectual labor, that it did something really great for personally, just like it felt really good to be in conversation and connected.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, well, that also applies to the residency. I felt it, you sometimes think, oh,
Yeah.
Zoom won't allow for that, but Zoom allows for a lot of intimacy and a lot of like connection if the context is right and if you set it up in that way.
Hmm.
And so I think these groups, these opportunities to work with people who share your values, your politics, your interests,
Yeah.
and a kind of critical gaze onto things that are specific, like the environment or, something that brings you together. I think the potential for that is extraordinary, especially if you abandon those disciplinary boundaries, like
Yeah.
I love that you ask, and I'm like, it's just not even something that I really pay attention to at this stage, and
Hmm.
sometimes methodologically or, sometimes there's a bit of a divide between sort of social science and more sort of critical humanities or whatever it is that media studies falls into. I honestly don't know. It's sort of this promiscuous field, right? And
Hmm.
maybe that's part of the reason I don't feel like I need to belong anywhere. And I think media studies has sort of like pushed people to question like,
Yeah.
the specificity of like, or the boundaries of our objects of study. So yeah, so I'm with you in the sense that like, I love doing this with you. I love the idea of just building with anyone who's just like kind of shares those values. So
Yeah.
yeah, so someone's just saying it's more about practices than disciplines. And I
Hmm.
agree. Like, it's just like, do you have the sort of same set of goals and intentions for what it means to be together, what
Yes.
kind of scholar you want to be. Like, are we all on board for that? Then let's just make something happen. And I think
Hmm.
the different like stages of your career will allow for
That's true.
that to function differently. So that's just something to be cognizant of. But like, yeah, I think sort of like, yeah, if you're in a position to enable things for other people, then I think that's like a very good thing to invest in.
Mhm,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I think position, like time and career, and like I've left formal academia, which has really let me just be like, I don't give a hell about this. Like,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
means very little to me increasingly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes the biggest like pushback or like debates that I have with niche colleagues or etc. is when it comes to like being hard lines about hand wringing about, oh, is this actually like in our discipline, or
Mm-hmm.
is it Canadian enough, or is it environmental history enough? And I'm like, it like when you move beyond these academic walls, when we're
Mm-hmm.
speaking to each other or speaking or communicating with the public, these disciplinary like boundaries do not matter.
Mm-hmm.
It matters that the relationships and the way that we inform and meld our knowledges
Yeah.
together. So I like this idea of being post-disciplinary, and I love your response,
Yeah.
and of course I love your work. So thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining me
Yeah,
today and chatting about it.
absolutely.
And
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me and for setting it up and for putting up with my limited Instagramming skills. But I really appreciate this opportunity to just like, especially send a shout out to the grad
mhm,
students whose lectures are on YouTube. Like, it's
yeah,
really amazing stuff. It sort of blows my mind and gives me so much hope for like the future, like what we're
yes,
doing here as scholars. And I'm like, especially turning our attention to the environment, just feels more urgent than ever. And people are doing good work. So,
yeah,
any shout out to them is like a like a good
absolutely.
opportunity. Yeah. So thank you for enabling that. And yeah,
Yeah, thank you,
yeah,
Mel. And yeah, everyone should follow Environmental Media Lab, check out your podcast, The Data Fix, which is great. And yeah, thanks so
yeah.
much.
All
And
right. I
enjoy
don't know how
your
to
holiday
leave, but
weekend.
hang up on me because I don't even know how to get out of this thing. So, um,
I will, don't worry.
thank you so much, everyone, for coming by. All right.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica.
bye.
Bye. Bye.